And that was, didn't you know about it? Was it? Still someone, I'll get on.
Okay, Rick, I see you're in the car now. Do you want me to just introduce Allison and she can take it?
Yeah, go ahead.
So about, gosh, I'd say it's close to a month ago. We had one of these Zoom meetings. We followed it up, Stacy and I, with a coffee the next day, talking about the roofing situation at, I'm just gonna say Tamaron. We had a lot of leaks this year in the lodge. And those leaks speak for themselves. But at the advice of Greg Petit, he said we also need to take a hard look at the outlying clusters because trouble was brewing in some of those roofs. So with that, the board agreed to that we needed an independent assessment of this situation at Tamaron. And after some looking, that brought us to Allison with SEH, which is the old Russell engineering firm in Durango. So Allison now has, and I think you've also had an engineer with you in tow in some of your inspections, Allison. Inspected our facilities, and she has issued 2 reports, one for the lodge and one for the outlying clusters. And the purpose of today's meeting is that she can go ahead and walk us through those 2 reports. So with that, Allison, I'd just like to hand it to you.
Sounds good. Thanks for the intro, Mark. Gary, can you make the computer me a presenter?
No, if you insist.
Oh, actually, maybe, no, I am disabled. Yeah, sorry.
Hang on 1 second. Now, you're on here twice.
Yeah, make the computer version of me where it says Allison Miller computer. If you can make that the presenter, that'd be great. And then I'll share my screen. But hi, everybody. Nice to meet you. I'm Allison Miller. And I met many of you already, but to the owners I haven't met, I am excited to show you this report. Well, I don't know about excited. That's probably the wrong word to share, but wanted to share the report with you, my findings, and kind of next steps, and give you the information that you need to make the best decision possible for the association. So sweet. Okay. Thank you, Gary.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
That's Heather. I'm not sure who the phone is.
All right.
Jenny Lauderback. I'll mute. My computer audio is not working, so I'm just listening.
Okay. Can you all see my screen? Is that
Yes.
working for you?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'll start with the lodge replacement report. And so we're looking at this holistically. Like Mark said, we're an architecture and an engineering firm. And you may think that this is solely a re-roofing project, but I think there's a lot more that goes into a roof and its performance than just the material on the outside. So that's what we were really taking a hard look at. And I'll go through this here. Just talked about the background of when I visited, which was in March. So there was still a lot of snow during that time, but sorry, my computer's a little delayed here. Come on, computer. I'd have to exit out of this. I'm so sorry. Not the best way to present, but I'm going to just share it with you in regular Bluebeam. So I was there in March, and I know that many of the problems that you experienced were earlier this winter. I know it was an epic winter, unprecedented, but it really did. It was the stress test of your roofing system as a whole. And so what you saw were a lot of leaks this year in the lodge. These are leaks that were recorded, that were reported to Page. And basically what we're doing here is we're looking at the pattern of where those leaks are occurring and giving a visual of what's happening here. And ultimately there were 25 leaks in as of April 26th, and 23 of those were on the east side. Predominantly, we think that's because of the solar exposure. You know, you're only getting that morning sunlight over there, and things aren't drying out as quickly, and you're getting more ice dams on that side. And so we looked at, you know, what compromises the roof. So cedar shake, obviously, most of you know what's up there, but that standing seam metal, brand new, pretty much in the world of standing seam 2016 is not that old. But what's happening is that because of the cedar shake roofing failure, it's a systematic failure. And those ice dams that are building up there, it's causing damage to the standing seam when ice is falling onto it. And so as we looked into it, I really think the standing seam only needs repairs, and really what you're looking at and the most important thing to tackle is replacing that cedar shake roof. And so in our report here, we looked at, okay, a visual inspection of, yeah, you're having cupping, warping, and splitting of those cedar shakes. And that can be seen from that elevator overrun here. And that's resulting, there's also a lack of insulation and poor ventilation in the roof assembly, which I'll get into, which is all in all resulting in water intrusion on the interior. And there's a huge cost to homeowners right now. You spent a lot of money mitigating those ice dams this year, and all the icicles up here, and clearing the roof of snow. So those unanticipated costs really start to add up there. This was a photo from Mark earlier this winter, but a lot of ice is building up in those PTAC flow slope roof units. And so that's kind of a low hanging fruit of something that could be fixed in the short term to really have a huge impact in winters to follow. And we looked at the existing building drawings, and what I noticed was kind of a lack of ridge ventilation. And so ventilation and insulation are equally important when it comes to preventing ice dam buildup, and having those roof assemblies function as they should. And the insulation that's in there that was confirmed by your past property maintenance manager is bat insulation R19, which is consistent with the existing drawings from the 70s. And R19, that's pretty low compared to what we provide now. If we were building this brand new, we would do an R49.
Report.
Oh,
The roof
Andy, sorry.
report.
Do you want to mute yourself?
Oh, it's online. Gary's got everybody.
All good. Okay. Thank you. So next, we really, in our report, we were looking at how do we fix these underlying issues, because this is no easy feat. This isn't as simple as going up there and just providing a new roofing system. It's really insulation and ventilation that should be improved, and you have an opportunity to do that right now in this re-roofing process. If you don't take this opportunity to really fix these underlying issues, I'm afraid you're going to see systematic failure earlier than anticipated, and you're going to be spending a lot of money on a new roof. So let's take this opportunity as much as possible, as much as financially is feasible, to try and insulate better and provide better ventilation, so you're preventing these ice dams from building up. So yeah, in 2023, the additional cost to homeowners was $83,400 from the reports that we received. And I don't believe that was in your budget originally. So that's a lot of money to be spending on somebody to go clear that roof. So if we can prevent those ice dams in the first place, that'll really help. Another thing to consider too is heat matting and heat trace. So we explore that in this section. That can be really effective in those super problematic areas like the low slope PTAC unit pans. And then at the eaves. So if insulation can't be brought up to an R49 and you're still continuing to have that problem, it's good to have it at the eaves to prevent the ice dam buildup in the first place. And really that buildup is happening because there's a major temperature differential between your cold roof assembly and your heated interior space. One thing that's really kind of easy to do, I don't know if you have time to do this, is a thermographic analysis. And someone can go out with the right equipment and basically see where there's been water intrusion, where you're losing heat, those kind of things. And it generates these pictures that really give you a full story of what you cannot see from the exterior, or, the interior too, when you can see those water intrusion areas. Sometimes water intrusion is hidden and you'll never know. So we did have a site drainage study, just a really high level study done. Our civil engineer went out there, and I know that part of the problem is that trench drain on the west side is freezing. And so we came up with two different options. The reason why we're getting into this is on that west side, it's super critical to, if we're gonna fix one problem, which is not having the ice build up in the first place, is to get the roof snow melt to not be pooling at the ground level where you have your pedestrian and vehicular circulation pathways. That can be a whole nother legal issue for you guys as an HOA. So to mitigate that, we really recommend on that west side doing guttering with heat trace cable down into your stormwater system. And that's where it kind of gets a little bit tricky, because that's a problematic system. It wasn't buried underground far enough. So we arrived with the board at option A, which is kind of the easiest, let's try this first option. And it is the least invasive of all the options. And that's to run some heat trace cable through that, through the trench drain and clean it out. Just some really simple measures, and then tie it in with the gutter system. And feel free, Mark, to stop me at any point if I'm not covering something that you want me to. So here's a deeper dive into that insulation that I was talking about. So when you look to improve insulation, we know we're taking that existing roofing material off. There's an opportunity to add rigid foam insulation. It gets a little tricky though when you do an asphalt shingle. You have to come in with a nailable polyiso insulation. You can't just do regular polyiso. But that could add an additional R10 to your roof assembly, bringing it up to an R29, which is a significant increase, but still R20 under current code. One thing with these kind of projects, you never know what you're going to get into. The roofing subcontractor might find some damage to the sheathing panels that are up there. So once he takes off the roofing material and all the underlayment, if there's any water damage done to the sheathing panels, those will have to be replaced. And if those are being replaced, it exposes the cavity, which is an opportunity to add some additional insulation into that roofing cavity. And that's something that we looked at this from what is the least impact to owners? Because the reality of going in and into the interior of the unit, taking out all the ceilings and insulating is not feasible. That would put people out of their units for far too long. That's way too expensive. So this was, okay, how can we improve the insulation with the least amount of, intrusion to those homeowners? And so that's kind of that additional cavity insulation and rigid foam above scenario. Best of both worlds, trying to get you up to where it should have been in the first place, which is around an R49. Equally important is ventilation. That's something that the subcontractor is going to have to do when they're looking at the roof, is verify, what kind of ridge vents do you have? What size were installed, and what was the size of the soffit vents? And talk about perhaps increasing the size of those soffit vents. If you don't vent your roof properly, that can also cause a lot of issues and prematurely age your new roof. And that's what I don't want to see happen to you, is you spend a lot of money on new asphalt architectural shingles and have that system have the same problems as before. So that really covers that fixing those issues, the underlying issues section of the report. And then next we did an overview of different material considerations here. So when you're replacing a roof, if you don't want to improve the structural capacity of the roof, which would be, it would be financially infeasible, probably. You want to stay within the same weight class. So we're looking at, okay, what is the weight of a cedar shingle? Okay, you can either go in with cedar shingles again, which you wouldn't do for obvious reasons, or you could come in with a metal roof or asphalt shingles. And so we evaluated the pros and the cons of those. In talking to the board, and what we recommend is going with an asphalt composition shingle that, is an architectural shingle. It has visual dimension to it. It's less upfront cost than a metal roof. In our environment here, you might be at like a 25-year lifespan. It depends on kind of the product you get, and that's something that needs to be selected with the roofing subcontractor, the exact product. We provided a roof plan and a specification around an asphalt composition shingle. And then to wrap up this report, we talked about, when you're selecting a roofing subcontractor, making sure that it's someone that's qualified, that's insured, and has, a good record of projects in similar scale and scope. And then also here, life cycle costing and warranty. One thing that's kind of overlooked is, okay, if we spend less money up front, okay, we're spending less money overall, which that's not quite true, right? You got to look at the life cycle cost of a building material and a system. So if you think about not improving insulation, not improving ventilation, that is going to probably affect the lifespan of that product that you choose. So if you really think about it as a full system, what is that full life cycle cost, and when will you be replacing that roof next? And planning for that is really critical. You are in a situation where you're a little bit reactive right now. Mark and I have talked about that a lot, and it's not a good situation to be in as a former HOA board member. It's always good to plan ahead, and never happens. I can assure you that no HOA is ever ahead of these things. But in an ideal world, you kind of take all of this information and plan for even the next future replacement and how that's funded and what material is that going to be, that kind of thing. Talking about what a lot of you know already, but the last part here, we talk about phasing because that roof line is split. It isn't a gable roof. It's that kind of split gable. It could be possible to phase the roof there and tackle the east side first, and then do the west side at a later date. There will be additional cost in that because you are remobilizing. That roofing subcontractor will have to come out twice to do the roof over the lodge. Benefit though is that if you go with a local subcontractor, people might be a little too busy this construction season to do the whole roof. So taking it in bits and pieces might be a little bit more palatable for them and financially for you. Considering talking to the Glacier Club about replacing their roof, and then we just talk about repairing the standing seam. And that concludes the lodge report. and analysis. And I want to open up to any questions before we talk about the outlying clusters. And hopefully I covered everything.
Allison, one thing I'll just jump in on for the benefit of the owners, you mentioned the asphalt shingles, but we've, aside from cost, there's also the with the steel, we had talked about, roof snow sliding and the hazards in the front of the building with a steel roof, and maybe even related to the purgatory problem this past year. Could you address that?
Yeah. So there's higher snow slide potential with a metal roof. And like you said, with purgatory, that was a really tragic story this winter. I think it isn't an issue on your east side because that's all dumping into open space. I love standing seam roofs. I think every architect does, but they come with their problems, and that is with snow slides. So you have to do snow fencing and heat tracing, guttering with that to prevent it from being a life safety issue. But even with snow fencing, the snow can still sometimes slide underneath the snow fence, or it can go above it if it's a really, really heavy snow year. So it's not quite a perfect system. There is a huge upfront cost. Shingles have a higher coefficient of friction. And there's probably a more technical term than that, but preventing the snow from sliding as easily. And so that's where we really started to lean towards the asphalt shingles, is that, and also architecturally, I think it is a little bit more in keeping with the existing architecture of the lodge. I think standing seam on the front side might look a little bit out of place, just by the date of the structure. But anyways, I think it's a good system that is less of a liability on that west side for you guys.
Okay, I have one other question and then I'll stop. You mentioned the east side, and 23 of the leaks were on the east side.
Mm-hmm.
In the past, I had asked Tim Broen even a year or so ago before I was on the board, how many leaks? And he said, well, not really any. Well, 23 is not really any. What do you think, based on what you see, is the potential? Maybe there's been seepage on the east side over the years, and you said you don't know what you're going to find until you pull the shingles back. Do you have a gut what we might find on that east side as we pull the shingles back in terms of the quality of the sheathing and maybe problems with insulation that may be moldy a little bit and that sort of thing?
Yeah, my guess, and your maintenance staff here too, Bobby can talk about this too, but I am guessing there's going to be damage to the sheathing panels along that eave. So, and it is kind of a can of worms. We've talked about that. Like, unfortunately, with renovation projects, you never know what you're getting into. But I think most of those leaks are happening at the eave where you're seeing those ice dams occur, and that's trickling down through the wall cavity. You're seeing it kind of trickle into the ceilings. Let me pull up that photo there. And I don't remember exactly what unit this was, but my guess is that this is from an ice dam up above from the cedar shake roof, trickling down into the wall cavity and then coming through the ceiling there. And you're seeing that leak appear in the ceiling. And most of the units, it was coming through the ceilings from my understanding. But Bobby and you guys, you could talk more about that too, but.
You're correct on that, Allison.
Okay. Yeah, so in this leak map here, we were guessing kind of where is that leak coming from. The guess is that these are either from the standing seam or the cedar shake, these ones here. A lot of them are from the cedar shake, I think. But I mean, that That could be from standing seam. You never know. These are stacking under the cedar shake. So these are all from cedar shake failure up here is my guess. When you look at a section cut of the structure. So that's how we use those sections from the existing building drawings to determine, probably where these are originating from. So I think with fixing the standing seam and replacing the shake roof, you're going to see a lot less of these leaks if you put in the right mitigation measures to prevent ice dam buildup. If you don't really solve that issue, this can crop up again and again. Heat trace, heat matting in the eaves definitely helps. But it's so low. The insulation value in that cavity is so low for what it should be. You're just throwing money at heating the eaves, and you're not. I mean, if you look at the environmental impact of that, you're losing so much heat through your roof in the winter, is my guess. So I think it would really help the property, the longevity of the property, if you invest in the right system. So
Allison,
lots of
my
things.
name's
Yeah.
Chris, and I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
You had talked about peeling back some of the wood shingles and that sort of thing. We've had some bat colonies, over 2,000 bats living in the lodge at one time, and we had a lot of bat mitigation work done over the years. So by doing this, will that be voiding all of that work that was done, or will it be sealed up properly once it's put back?
Where were the bats coming in? Were they in your elevator hoistway?
They were in the eaves. They were in the soffits.
Okay.
We live on the 5th floor, so they were in the elevator shafts. So where that picture's taken, that you're looking out by that, standing out that door, we own on the 5th floor. So they were coming out on the corner of where the wall meets our window.
Okay.
So when the lodge remodel happened, it fixed some of it, but we also needed some bat mitigation work to fill in the holes as well. So our concern is, we hopefully have mitigated quite a bit of what's happening now by pulling things back, gonna invite them back into the building.
Well,
Chris,
I am not a bat mitigation specialist, but
Chris, those bats are they gone in the past 2 years, or is it a continuing problem?
It's a continuing problem, and from my understanding now, no bat mitigation work is being done this year, and they're migratory, so they're supposed to be here sometime within the end of the month until October. So as it warms up, they're going to start migrating and having their babies here, and they're used to coming back to Tamaron. So we've told the board about it. We've expressed our concerns, and what we're told is they're no longer going to be doing bat mitigation. But if we pull the shingles back, it's going to invite bats to come back in.
I don't have a great answer for that. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
It's not an accurate statement to say we said there would no longer be any bat mitigation. It was just this year because of the economic conditions. So, any work that's done is not going to open up more holes. It should be no less, and if anything, it would be more. It would be taking care of more holes. Because if we see places that need fixed, they'll be fixed.
Well, with knowing this is a problem, it certainly ought to be a priority as we move forward. We know it's a problem. They have to get access somehow, and it seems to me this is an opportunity to have people up on the roof to focus on this problem and see what they can do to close entrance points. I'm not a bad expert either. But there's a reason that they're there is because they've got a way to get into the roofs and live there. But
And I wonder if you improve the soffit ventilation, like maybe those have to be replaced. I'm not sure. That was something I didn't get to inspect close up, but your roofing subcontractor could and evaluate, okay, what's the size of that? What's the condition? And that's probably, my guess is that's where a lot of those bats are coming in from in the past, is in the soffit vents.
Bottom line answer, Chris, is that stuff will be looked at as the roof is being repaired.
Okay, and will it be addressed with a bat professional, or we just want to make sure that we're not undoing all the work that has been done?
I mean, that's what I'm saying, is that there'll be nothing undone that has already been taken care of. If anything, there'll be more protection, if there's problems that are encountered. So are we going to have a bat mitigation company out there? No, we are not this year.
Allison, I have a question.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Do you plan to remove the existing drip edge that's along the roof? Because that's part of what, there has been somebody out here and done quite a bit of work at sealing all of that up. And if you take all that off, you're going to remove everything he's done.
Yeah, I mean, this would be new drip edge, new flashing, new boots.
That means you will have removed everything he's done. And I would highly suggest you consult with him. We can give you his contact information.
agreed.
One thing is, if you improve the insulation by adding rigid to above the deck, that will increase the height of the roofing profile.
Yeah, that all sounds great, but I just want to stress how difficult this issue's been, and this bat thing has been. It went on for so long before anything was done. And I really think it would be worthwhile for you to talk to Russell. He is the guy that came out here and did all the work, and get his input. I really think it'd be worth it.
Okay.
Agreed.
Any other questions, or? I know it's a lot to digest, so lots of good comments so far.
Can we ask a question? Absolutely.
Yeah, we have a question here, Allison.
Okay.
Do I just talk?
Yeah.
Regularly?
Yeah.
My question is there anything that can be done to mitigate the icicles that form on the west side so that we don't have a tragedy here like what happened up at Purgatory?
Yeah. So, and I think we can answer this in the room, but B has asked, is there anything we can do on the west side about the icicles? And so I think that's what B asked.
Well, it's a real danger.
Absolutely.
That's what.
Yeah. So
And people, the tourists who come here aren't aware of it. People
Right.
who live here have one eye looking.
This
up.
project, that's one of the priorities of this project, is
Oh,
to deal with
good.
that.
I'm sorry.
oh no, that's what this meeting's
No,
for.
that's super important. That's a really good comment. And the reason why they're occurring in the first place is because of a temperature differential between your eave. So this is a really simple diagram, but you have an eave that's overhanging unheated space. And here's your heated space. So interior heat is rising and it's melting the snow layer underneath. And it's basically sliding down to the eave that's unheated and there's not enough insulation up here, and proper ventilation probably. And that's what's happening is you're getting an ice dam at that eave. And as you saw, those get really nasty. So when I say ice dam, it's kind of synonymous with the major icicles that you're seeing over there. They're one and the same. And they're really, really hard to clear. They are nasty. Insurance doesn't like them. They don't tend to cover them, especially if it's a recurrent issue. And my understanding is that you have to pay for those interior damages resulting in those ice dams. So you can see in this diagram, like meltwater's backing up, it's leaking into the roof cavity or into the wall, and you're seeing that manifest in the drywall, or there's a drip, or, you can see it in a lot of different ways. But it really, that when we're talking about improving the insulation, and doing heat trace matting, and if you can, improving the cavity insulation, that's kind of the whole enchilada to really solve this root issue. So, and prevent any buildup, because it is a liability. So hopefully that answers your question there.
There was a question in the chat. I don't know if everybody saw that. Question for the board more than Allison, since we are dealing with so many ice dams, have we opened conversations with the insurance company?
Is the question, does insurance cover that? I guess, what type of questions with the insurance company?
I read it.
I'll jump in and say, so my homeowner's insurance covers ice dams. So does the property insurance there cover ice dams or not? And since there's 23 of them, is there any way to offset some of these costs that we're going to incur? And have we gone down the path of even asking what's covered and what's not covered in the insurance company?
David, I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know if Rick or Andy, you do. I know the person that would have dealt with it is either you, Paige, or Joe, and Joe's not on today. We can get you an answer. And I don't even want to speculate, although I have a good guess. Paige, do you have anything to add to that?
No, we can talk with our insurance agent. I have a feeling I know what the answer is going to be, but we can dig deeper into that.
What we can do is, and I was going to address this at the end of the meeting, but myself, Stacy, some of the other board meetings, we're planning to have a coffee on the 25th in the morning to meet with owners and talk about these issues. And we'll have an answer to that question on the 25th.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions regarding the lodge?
Yes.
One more question.
All right.
The other hazard we have here at Tamaron is fire. And you haven't mentioned which materials would be best in a fire situation, which some of us have already lived through.
Right.
And I was terrified thinking that we had shake shingles, and I didn't think anything of my home when I had to evacuate. But Dave Dunn assured me that all those shake shingles had been treated with many different things and they were safe. But I'm throwing that out there to see the asphalt
Right.
would be.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a non-combustible roofing material. So I would talk to your insurance and say, hey, if we're replacing our roof with a non-combustible roofing material, would we see any benefit in our premiums at all? I don't know if they would. I am not an insurance person, but it's always worth an ask. I mean, especially in new construction, if you're going with non-combustible materials on your exterior, that you definitely get a break on your premiums. So, yeah, but, I mean, metal or asphalt will be fine. Yeah. That's why I'm not recommending you go back in with cedar shingles. So, yeah. Plus they are, outdated. It's an opportunity to refresh the lodge. It's gonna be an upgrade in look, I think.
Eric is asking what is involved in repairing the standing seam portion of the roof.
Yeah, let me go to that section. My cursor's being weird. Sorry. So really, I think it's probably flashing failures, especially around those PTAC units. So I think, like I said, that's a good area potentially to add that heat trace. And then also like silicone sealant, that's kind of a low hanging fruit when you're talking about repairing standing seam, is where it's abutting another material, or you have any flashing. So if it's kind of pulling away from the wall or something like that, if an icicle fell on it, which has happened a lot, removing those dents and repairing it at those locations. But new sealant should really help with that. And if it continues to be a problem and you're still getting a lot of leaks, then maybe, that standing seam is only 7 years old. It's really what's below it that's a problem. Lack of insulation below it. And from what I can see, there's probably a ventilation issue. And that's going back to those existing drawings that there's no ridge venting in that area. This is like a little section cut through, a detail section cut through that PTAC unit. This was, back when that was cedar shake. But there's no ridge vent. So hot air, once it gets into this cavity, has no way of escaping from what I can tell. So if you still have problems with that standing seam in years to come, after it's been repaired, that's another conversation to have, is, what do you do there to really fix that? But you still have R19 insulation in that cavity. That's not, we're not talking about replacing that or adding to it at this point in time because of how new that roof is over there. I hope that answers that question. And, one thing that I also noticed from this photo too, this was from Mark, and at the height of when you had the really bad icicles, you don't see any buildup of icicles, and correct me if I'm wrong, like Bobby Greg Page, if you saw any, but like you look at this photo, all of the icicles are from the cedar shake roof, and your major ice dam issues are at the PTAC units, but I don't see any building up along that eave. So that kind of indicates to me that maybe what I'm talking about here isn't a huge problem right now. Like I wouldn't, go to the expense of replacing that roof. You just did it literally 7 years ago, and that should be a 40-year roof, or so up at that elevation in those conditions. It has a little bit of a shorter lifespan than say down in town, but that's my 2 cents on that, is spend the money where the problems are.
Stop the ice from falling in.
So. Hopefully I haven't shocked too many people.
It is fire hose, Allison.
All right.
Now I guess we can go to the next step, the clusters.
Okay. All right, let me reformat this. Okay, so this is a separate report, and we approached it in a very similar manner to the lodge. Broke it out into cluster though for High Point, Gamble Oak, and Pinecone. And so when I was there in March, the roofs weren't visible. They were covered in snow. So went out at the beginning of May to go look at them. And followed a similar analysis, asked Paige for leak reports from this year. We did not go back in previous years, so I don't know about that, but very few leaks were actually reported over in the outlying clusters. So in High Point, there were only 2. But when we walked the site, there were a lot of shards of that existing composite shingle material laying on the ground. And every roof I saw, it looks like systematic roof failure. I mean, these roofs do not look good. I won't sugarcoat it. They are in really, really bad shape, and it looks like they've reached the end of their useful life. And so I've talked at length with Mark about, how do you plan to replace these roofs? I think you have very similar issues here that you do to the lodge. And so we followed the same kind of theory here, okay, here's a section cut at High Point. And my understanding is, and this is the only building where I had detailed section cuts. So I can't verify this on the drawing side of things, but my understanding is High Point is the only one that has roof insulation. So from these drawings, there is 2 inches of rigid foam insulation above the tongue and groove decking here. And then you have your exterior plywood and your shingles there. I think you're seeing the same problems happen out there. Is this roof is failing because of inadequate ventilation and insulation. I think ventilation is less of an issue here because you don't have a cavity roof. Basically, all your insulation is above your roof deck here. So I think it's more of lack of insulation. And so going back to that original conversation about how ice dams are building up, you've got an R10 here. Modern code is an R49 for a roof in our climate. So you can see where a lot of hot air is escaping, and it's prematurely aging that roof there because you have so much moisture, so much condensation that's happening. And that's really what roof insulation is trying to prevent at an R49, is that the moisture is condensing underneath the roofing material above the roof deck and causing moisture related issues. So going back to the photos here, you're seeing a lot of fish mouthing is the term of what I saw out there, which is the curling and cupping and warping of those shingles. And I did not see much different in Gamble Oak or in Pine Cone. They look relatively the same to me. It's the same material. Problems out here, there's apparently no insulation above the roof deck. But I didn't see any drawings regarding that. No leaks in Gamble Oak this year. And approximately only $700 spent in clearing an ice dam out there. But similar life safety issues out there. Luckily, a lot of these roofs shed to open space, and you get a pretty steep pitch. So that's less of a life safety issue when it's out in open space versus in, vehicular and pedestrian circulation areas. But a lot of those are falling on the ground. That is not good when all of those are getting damaged from either clearing snow off of roofs or just the sheer, roof avalanches that can happen on there, taking shingles off, is my understanding from talking to Bobby and Greg, that the snow itself will just carry these shingles away. And that's why you're seeing those shards on the ground. Pine Cone is a little different. This was my photo that I took out there in March. And why I say it's different is because of the roof, some of the roofs pitching to the vehicular and pedestrian circulation pathways. So it's more of a life safety issue over here, I think, with that ice damming buildup. And really what's happening, going back to that section cut here, you've got heated space here, and you've got a really big eave. You've got these generous covered patios, and all of that is unheated. And those are prime areas for ice damming. And that's why you're seeing this in almost every circumstance, is lack of insulation. I think it's just dripping down and causing, you know, the ice dams to occur down here at the deck level, but not good. It causes property damage too, as well, even in that open space. So, our section here is almost the same as it was in the lodge report, where we talk about the causes and, you know, why the ice dams are occurring. That you could do with thermographic analysis. Maybe you have more time to do it on these properties and really see where your heat loss is occurring. I should not isolate the roofs as an insulation issue. I think you're under insulated in your wall cavities and in your floors, but that's a different discussion and way harder to fix. The amazing thing here is that if you do decide to improve the insulation, I think it's way easier than the lodge, because you can add it all above the deck. You can add polyiso insulation above that tongue and groove deck, and your impact to owners from the interior perspective is nil. You're not having to go into any units or anything or get into any cavities there, because there is no cavity. So you're doing it all from above instead of below. So I think it's a low-hanging fruit. It's something to really consider here. We gave a couple of different scenarios, one for High Point, because you already have existing insulation there, how to improve that, you know, adding less. It's going to increase the height of that fascia of that roof profile. But it's money worth spending when you really think about the, you know, energy bills are going to go down. Your roof will not prematurely fail because of water issues. And Gamble Oak and Pinecone, we calculated that differently since there is no insulation over there. So a couple different scenarios there to consider. When it comes to material selection here, I think you could consider a concealed metal fastener roof. When I say concealed metal fastener roof, I really recommend this over an exposed fastener roof like a pro panel, which is cheaper. Pro panel roofs don't have a long lifespan, especially at that elevation. It's about a 25-year roof maybe. And it takes a lot of work to maintain that. So with a standing seam, you know, you already have the structure to handle the weight. So you could go either shingle or metal. But maybe you want it to shed to those open spaces, and these roofs are highly visible. I think it would look pretty sharp out there to be looking at standing seam over the shingle. You see a lot less of the shingle because the pitch is a lot, or you just see a lot less of the roof, I should say, over the lodge, I think. But just some thoughts here. You could easily go with a shingle on these roofs if upfront cost is an issue. A standing seam roof is like a 40 to 50-year roof, so it'll last you a long time. So when you're really thinking about appetite for replacement and life cycle cost, that could be a consideration here, is how frequently, you know, when is the next time you're going to have to replace those roofs. And everything else here is the same as it was in the last report when it comes to life cycle costing and warranty. I already touched on that. So to summarize, I think it is a systematic failure of these roofs, unfortunately. And I really recommend that you consider fixing those root causes of those ice dams. And that's pretty much it. Did I cover everything there, Mark, for you guys?
Yeah, one thing that just came to my mind in your discussion, and Eric asked a question that may be related. So even if we go with 2 inches of foam on the Gamble or on the cluster roofs, it's still not ideal, but it's better than nothing. So you'd still have the issue of heat and excess heat working its way through the roof, which deteriorates
Mhm.
the materials. Would that be true as well with metal? In other words, with shingles, the roof would deteriorate the asphalt and it would have a shorter life. Would it make any difference at all having that type of heating issue with a metal roof, or would that sort of obviate the wear out problem?
I think it would probably wear it out faster, would be my guess. I don't know how much faster. But so 2 inches of ISO is only an R10. And if you're talking about getting it up to current code, which is what I would recommend, like I wouldn't just do 2 inches. It's just not enough. You're going to want to go thicker with that to get close to that number to prevent condensation. Condensation, regardless of the roofing material, is going to be an issue if you don't have the proper amount of insulation up there.
So metal or shingle on the
Yeah,
is going to wear out the roof.
I think it's going to deteriorate faster. And I mean, probably Mark and Bobby could talk to that too. Not Mark and Bobby, sorry. Bobby and Greg could talk to that too, of what they've seen in roofs and construction projects where they didn't have adequate insulation and what they've found out there. I think that's kind of valuable to hear from them too on a construction side of things.
How thick do these foam panels come? How thick can they be purchased?
It depends on the product here. So I was looking at a ventilated roof insulation panel here when I did this calculation, but that particular product comes in 5.5 inches is one of them, and that gets you to an R32.5, that particular product. Every product is going to state a different R value for the thickness. So sometimes ISO comes in, 6 inches thick or 2 inches thick. It kind of depends on what you need for the application. Sorry, I just had an incoming call. Sorry about that.
And I think related to that, Eric asked you to say again why you have the ice dams over the porches. The theory behind that at the outline clusters over the deck.
It's the same issue that you're getting at the eaves at the lodge, except those are really deep spaces, those porches. So it's a lot of roof that's over unheated space. And so there's such a big temperature differential of the roof over the heated space because you're getting a ton of heat loss from that roof. And the cold, unheated patios. So water's melting at a really high rate because you have no insulation basically. And it's causing these epic ice dams that are occurring because there is such a major temperature differential. So really that's the goal of insulation. Eliminate the temperature differential in your roof assembly. So hopefully that answers it. But same diagram as before there. Did I include that? Where is that? Yeah, there we go. Same idea, except in this case, your overhangs are covering a patio, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're really, really deep, but it's the same idea here. So adding insulation here, like I said, super easy. I think it's the low-hanging fruit. The benefit of going with a metal roof is you don't need a nailable polyiso insulation. So it's easier in that regard than shingles. And it is going to increase the thickness of that roof profile. I don't think that's a bad thing. It's just, how it's detailed is different. You're going to have, a taller fascia profile around there.
Did you see Garrick's follow-up, Allison?
I'm not seeing comments. I'm so sorry.
Okay, what?
Maybe I should pull those up.
Gary, can you read it?
Yeah, he asked, there is no heat in the roof above the back decks. What are you insulating?
So you're not in, the goal isn't to insulate that area. It isn't heated. I guess you could step down. The goal is to have the temperature of your eave be the same temperature as over your heated space over here. And you could, maybe this would be a really weird detail. I don't know, Bobby and Greg could talk about this too, but you could add rigid over your heated and stop it. Potentially that it would be a weird step in your profile. And you'd have to flash that really, really well. But you could potentially stop that poly ISO at your heated area. But you're still going to have an issue here in your walls potentially, because if you, sorry, I'm getting really technical, but if you think about your insulation as a full system, you have to be able to trace your finger around your full building envelope, right? So adding insulation to the roof is one piece of this puzzle. I can see that there probably wasn't enough insulation in your wall cavities and your floor cavities either. So it's just one part of the problem, but I think it's worth spending money on when
Well,
you look at
is
re-roofing.
the visual answer that you'd have to run the if you're putting 5.5 inch insulation over the heated areas, you'd have to run it all the way to the ridge of the roof, so the roof is flat all the way down.
Yeah, I would run it all the way to the end of your eave, and then you don't have a weird, bizarre step in your roof, because that's going to look really weird.
Yeah.
And yeah, Bobby, Greg, did you guys want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think you need to keep your roof profile the same and not step it down, because it's gonna cause a lot of problems. It's not gonna look good.
Yeah.
Allison, one of the questions I've had asked of me, and maybe this goes into maybe a little bit more explanation on your term systematic failure, is can we just go out and replace some of the shingles and get by for a while and just put this off? And when I talked to you about that before, that's when you brought up the word systematic failure to me the very first time. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I mean, you can do whatever is financially feasible here at the lodge or the outlying clusters. And if that's only the roofing material, so be it. But I think you're still going to see the same issues happen, and you're going to see premature aging of any roof system, because it is, I mean, when you look at a building envelope, so the roof, the walls, everything, it's a full assembly. It's not just one material acting alone. Yeah, I think you could go up to the lodge and you could just do shingle, and you could do heat trace matting at your eaves to try and prevent ice dam buildup. Your energy costs are still going to be incredibly high, so you're not solving that. And I don't know if it would be 100%, like if it would completely solve the issue.
That's really not the sort of the question I was having addressed, and that is just going up and let's just say go to High Point, with a bundle of shingles under your arm and replace just the broken shingles. That was the question, and what you had told
Gotcha.
me, not individual shingles that need to be replaced. That's when you introduced me to the term systematic failure.
Yeah, I don't think you could go in for like spot replacement, not when your roof looks like this. That is every single roof that I saw. I really didn't see an exception to that. This will happen again if you don't improve the whole system. because this is a moisture related issue because of lack of insulation.
So here's, and obviously this is a big project.
Yeah.
Talk about the lodge and all of the clusters. And you know, the in terms of age, the lodge is 25 years old, and we've got 1 year on each of the clusters that younger, 24 at High Point, 23 at Pinecone, 22 at Gamble Oaks. If this was a phased project that we were able to break it out over a number of years, and I'm gonna, maybe this is a Greg Petit crystal ball question, but Greg, you know, starting at the lodge this year and fixing the worst parts of the lodge this year and moving forward, you know, maybe a High Point phase A, a High Point phase B, and moving on for a number of years. How long do you think we could go doing the worst first and get through this project? And, you know, how far could we stretch it out?
I mean, it just depends on the severity of these winters. If we have another couple of winters like the one we just had, it'd be done. So, I mean, High Point, you could probably go, you know, phase it in over a couple of years, but I'd want to try to start that in a year or so.
Do you think that if we had an 8-year plan and we worked our way from the lodge all the way down through High Point, then Pinecone, and then Gamble, according to the age of the roofs?
Yeah.
Is this, you know, are we, how would you evaluate that risk? You know, is that too long to go, or do you think that that's a reasonable approach?
I think it's probably reasonable. But like I say, it just depends. I mean, High Point seems to be getting, some of these areas are getting worse by the year. And I mean, it's not on a straight line. It's a graduating scale of how fast they're aging. So they're not aging gracefully.
So probably in about 4 years, we see Gamble Oaks looking a lot like High Point does right now.
Probably so. They're not that far behind.
No, it's just the age.
Right.
Allison, whoops, wrong. Eric asked the question, we were told that the appearance of the cluster roofs is intentional. That is, it is designed to look like a shingle.
I think it was shake originally. Let me go back to that section. Yeah, they were hand split cedar shake. So that is true that was the original architectural design, and that was completely of the era, right? But no, I don't believe these roofs or that material is designed to look like that. That looks like roofing failure to me. I think if you're trying to stay architecturally consistent with what's been done in the past, like shingles, yeah, it's more consistent with the original architectural intention, the architectural appearance. But you're meeting the fire resistant requirements of that roofing. So that's something to consider when you're looking at these roofs is, maybe going back in with asphalt composite architectural shingles instead. And those can look really good too. They've got a shorter lifespan than a metal roof, than a standing seam. But that's something to consider. Hopefully that answers the question. But yeah, I don't think these were intended to look this way.
Hey, Mark.
Yes.
There is one standing seam roof in Pinecone. And it's what unit? 840.
It was Carlton's old unit.
846 and 7.
846 and 7.
And it's performed.
It sheds snow, and there's no snow on that roof. There's just a big pile of snow behind that unit.
So it sheds.
It sheds and there's no leaks in that thing either. So, I mean, the standing seam where you got the open space to go to would be really good on these.
Mhm.
Well, I personally just think from a visual, I imagine driving up 550 from Durango, you know how you look onto Gamble first thing? And I think just uniform standing seam would architecturally would be really sharp.
Mhm.
I think we have a question in the room. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
the question is the price difference, just percentage wise between the asphalt and the standing seam metal. I mean, are we talking 20, 30%, 50? Any idea?
I don't know right now. Do you, I guess, BHP, Bobby, Greg, do you guys have a recent cost? Did you price that out on a project?
It'll be between 30 and 40% more.
Okay.
These roofs will be easy to do because there's no valleys, very few vents, it's just straight run. That's gonna be in favor. A roofing contractor can fly down these things.
So does the report that we have, is it in a position to be able to give it to a roofing contractor and actually get bids off of it? I mean, all the measurements are included in it, et cetera. We just have to decide what we want them to bid on.
Yes.
One of the things that we're gonna need to do is, as we move this forward, that's gonna be, this is gonna be the conversation that we all have, is getting 2023 bids. So we have some metrics to know what it's gonna cost for some of these various alternatives. Right now, we're just facing the problem, except for the lodge. We have no idea what kind of costs would be involved to do the outline clusters, but it's something that we're gonna have to get in the very short term.
Do we have local contractors
We
that
do.
are capable? of
Yes.
doing this?
Yeah. And
More than one?
Yes.
yeah,
And Allison and everybody, when we're talking about these outlying areas, the leaks that we've had, just that we've seen, take High Point, for instance. Those were all basically on the east side. You don't get any. And it wasn't from the shingles, the fish mouthing and everything else, the upper area, which is heated, like Allison has pointed out. And the benefits of the insulation, like you say, is to keep, the cold area and the heated area the same temperature, which would be great, but I don't think it would be possible because of the porch. And the issue we're having now with the leaks is the ice dams forming over the cold area of the large porch and then backing up to the heated area and going under the shingles. That's where we see our issues. So, I mean, if you were to cover those roofs where you could with standing seam, I mean, the snow shed alone from the upper is going to clear the lower. But that's where the leaks are coming from, is from that 6 to 7 feet of cold area that just freezes up. And then to get up there and hammer and chisel it out is what's creating your damage.
It
So-
just like standing seam would solve an awful lot of problems here.
You're exactly right, because they're getting into light fixtures and things as well.
Yeah, once
And the insulation may be very attractive to own. I mean, again, this is something that we've got to have lots of conversations with owners. But
Yeah.
it would seem to me that a lot of owners might find it very desirable to, if they could get an R33, did you say, Allison, insulation factor above their places, because some of the people, especially some of the folks that have electric heat, I've heard of electric bills this winter that are just mind-boggling. What people are spend to heat a 1,300 square foot condo.
Well, it would definitely be nice to have some insulation in those units, no doubt.
Yeah, I really did want to include that in my report, but I didn't get the bills of the really expensive end unit. And I'm forgetting her name, Pam. Was
No,
it Pam?
Peg Gibson.
Yes, Peg, yes. So that is something I could add in the future if you want me to do a comparison to one that has been insulated. and the performance of that. But the difference there is that he insulated his entire unit floor, walls, and ceiling. So it's not like just improving the roof insulation will solve all the problems, but it would help a lot. A lot of heat loss comes from the roof. Most of your heat loss does. So
Prices.
I would totally do a thermographic analysis if it were me on, you know, a few of the units. It's not expensive. You could just do a couple units and look at it, see where your heat loss is, and then let that inform you. But I really believe that this is the easiest thing to just add rigid to above the roof. It would be, it's not invasive. It, you know, constructability wise is pretty easy, and I could let Greg and Bobby comment on that, but you know, it's pretty straightforward, especially if you're going standing seam. Attaching to rigid is easy.
Eric, Rick, Gary, maybe you could read Eric's follow-up.
I'm sorry, say that again?
Gary had Eric had a follow-up chat.
Yeah, again, he said again, no firsthand experience, but we were told they were replaced many years ago with a shingle that was made from recycled tires. And I do remember that myself.
Yeah, I think regardless of what it was and what that material is, you're seeing that failure happen. And it has really reached the end of its useful life. And I agree with that conversation going back to earlier about staggering construction. This is such a big project for any subcontractor, you know, and financially for you guys, it makes a lot of sense to phase it. Yeah, and I don't think, you know, you're gonna see this massive failure tomorrow in it. I think it'll just continue to get worse and worse, especially if we have another really bad winter or great winter, depending on how you look at it. But from a facilities perspective, not a great winter.
One thing, going back to the lodge, Allison, maybe you could elaborate a little bit more. So architecturally, you know, you talked about phasing there on the east side and the west side. And, you know, given the uncertainties there and maybe even the availability of contractors to do everything all at once, is that something that could be done in a phased approach and without, you know, making things look goofy architecturally?
Yeah, I think so, because this line, let me draw it. That I'm showing here, this is a split ridge line, so the ridge doesn't meet up like a typical gable, right? There's a split to it, so your material isn't meeting up. If it was, I would say no. Phasing really would not be an option, but because it's split, I think you could do it. And Greg and Bobby could comment on the additional cost of, you know, having to mobilize twice, but anytime you drag out a construction project, it is going to be more expensive, but you're able to kind of finance it better along the way. So it's something to weigh. It's an option.
As the
for
follow-up
sure.
on this, you know, we're all sort of, where all this is going is all, except for the sloughing of the snow, it appears that standing seam is the more desirable roof. So the way you just described it, you could put the standing seam on the east side of the lodge and the shingles on the front, and architecturally it wouldn't be a goofy application.
I don't know from my experience being up there if you'd ever see the two next to each other without like an area I don't know if you could get an aerial perspective and see the two next to each other. So maybe not. Let me think about that. I mean, see, I don't think you would catch a view of the materials next to each other. You already have shake and standing seam, so it's not totally weird, in my opinion, to combine, because you already do have a combination of systems. And I see that a lot. you know, from even on a smaller scale where people combine standing seam and shingle.
Well, it wouldn't show from the street.
Yeah, I would
Everything
I
right
would
here.
say stay in the same colorway if you can. If you want to do that, just make sure that the colors are similar and complement each other.
Greg, what would
Do
you
that regardless.
think of maintenance? Would that solve a lot of the buildup and icicle problems on the east side?
It might, it may cause problems with all that snow sliding off on the backside too, on those lower roofs. That could be a big deal. Cause you gonna get, it's all gonna slide at once. Had a lot of snow.
Yeah. I mean, you could do snow fencing, heat
that's
trace
still-
and guttering, but that is a lot. Well, I wouldn't do guttering on the east side, but
Okay.
you could do snow fencing.
I'm with you. That's probably, I'll stop.
Yeah, no easy answer here.
Have any other questions about anything that we talked about?
I have a question about the west side and icicles.
Okay.
Up at the north end of the building, they don't seem to have an icicle problem.
At the north.
So is there some construction of the roof there that could be applied to our parking lot area? You know, to avoid all those awful icicles. I'm just terrified that somebody's gonna get killed.
Right. And that's a big concern, and that's
Little kids and skiers, and they're not looking at the danger.
right. Absolutely. And that's one thing that we're trying to fix with all of this is that the icicle problem.
Good.
Right.
good.
Absolutely.
Well, it just seems like at the north end, on the west side, they don't seem to have icicles hanging off there
Right.
the way we do down.
Not as
lower.
big. Icicles.
Now, I just throw that out there.
Right. That's right.
So
I
there's
don't-
some reason.
Yeah. I don't know that. Sitting behind them.
There are some.
There
icicles.
There are
there
some.
are icicles. Don't
Yeah.
forget that it was a few years ago, a big chunk of ice, all the way to the very last parking space
Oh, really?
came down and smashed somebody's car.
Yeah.
My daughters.
Right,
Oh, yeah.
it was Lindsay's,
Lindsay's, yeah.
right?
Yeah, they're-
So,
they're
so
there.
yeah,
The
they're
trees,
bad
the
everywhere.
trees
The
probably
trees
hide
probably
them
block
more.
them, yeah.
What's the next step?
Well, Gary, Stacy, I, and some other, we'll have a informal coffee here, the day before the 25th, 9 o'clock in the morning. Gary will send out that invite. The lodge, there are bid requests out right now for prices on the lodge. Paige, I don't think any have come in yet, have they?
No, they're due Tuesday.
Okay, so, you know, more to come, but it is to a number of contractors. So we'll have those metrics here next week and have a lot to talk about at the board meeting next week. But in the meantime, and you know, again, the day before the board meeting in the morning, we'll just have everybody can go home and think about all this and come back with more questions. And I think that we're going to have to sit down and have a lot of these discussions as time goes on. Especially, you know, we've got time on the outlying clusters. We've got options on the outlying clusters. You know, the big thing though, we all have to keep our eyes over is we're going to have to figure out a way to pay for all this. And that's going to be something that everybody's going to have to talk about, and we'll have to come up with a plan, but it's not going to be cheap, and it's going to have to be paid for.
Hey, Mark, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, well, I just wanted to thank everybody for showing up and for all the questions. I know the questions about the bats, the insurance, those are things that we had not considered, and you guys asking, you know, that's the whole purpose. It helps us out, helps us to incorporate everything. So everyone that asked questions, thank you very much. And we appreciate everybody showing up.
Will the bids include both types of material?
I'm not hearing.
Types of asphalt shingles.
No metal.
No,
Not on the lodge.
not on lodge.
It's just for the lodge.
Just-
Just for the lodge.
Okay.
Architectural asphalt shingles.
And part of the reason for that understanding is, let's say we're in Gamble Oak isn't gonna get done for 7 years, getting any dollar figure right now.
Sure.
It's just not gonna be applicable.
Well, I think it'll give us a good idea, though, just what we get up here wise.
Yep.
Yeah.
Those contractors could give us a bid on metal, just taking the information they already have.
Yeah.
Right.
So
We just need to, even if they're early, we just need to have metrics so we know what we're talking about.
well, for future bidding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Once we get started on this, we can start working on all the other projects.
Do we have any money that's basically earmarked for this at this point?
We have a question in the room.
Not much.
What's not much?
Gary, you can go look at our reserve, and then we don't have the bids in yet, so it's really, we can't say exactly what the numbers are, but at this point, the good guess is that we do not have, enough to do the big project at the lodge, not to mention the, outlying clusters, and all this will, have to be, additional money is gonna have to come in through to do it, and there's only one source of money at Tamaron.
Are we looking at special assessments versus increase in the HOA monthlies? Is that what?
I hadn't thought of increase of HOA monthlies, but I think special assessments have been talked about.
Do we have any kind of idea time wise on the lodge? I mean, are we talking the next 6 months, 12 months?
Well, the lodge will have. And as Allison said, that's where we're really, what was the term you used, Allison? Sort of pressed.
Like, what did I say? You were pretty compressed on schedule for that. But yeah, you have a lot more time to plan for the future on the outlier buildings, but not a ton. I mean, definitely it's on the forefront of your mind and you're able to make a informed decision with a little bit more time, which is nice.
Speaking for myself, I'd like to work with owners. We need to develop a plan and know what our path forward is. We may not like what it's going to cost, but the certainty certainly will be good for everyone.
I just saw a chat from James. And James, we don't have any idea on assessments at this point because we don't have any bids in. It's all kind of a step-by-step process. So no, we can't say 1,000 to 5,000 to 10,000. We just don't have that information yet.
What was the last bid for the lodge?
We haven't
Didn't-
received,
I thought we got one like 3 or 4 years ago. Wasn't there one in the past?
no, we haven't.
I saw it signed 3 or 4 years ago, but I never saw a number.
And 3 or 4 years ago is very different from today and the cost of everything.
Okay. I don't think there's any more. Do you have a question?
I'm just thinking that the idea of phasing in a program for the outer clusters would be well balanced against the amount of a special assessment, along with sort of the risk of systemic failures that Mark and Allison were talking about. It just seems like that. I just kind of wanted to make that comment. And I don't know if there is a way to really look at the clusters at present and sort of come up with where there might be a greater risk of systemic failures. Is that possible?
The one metric that I see that seems to just follow along is the east sides seem to get it worse than the west side. We see it at the Lodge, we see it at High Point, and you know, it must have something to do with morning sun versus afternoon sun. But that's all. Greg, maybe you can add more to it, but it just seems that the east sides are getting and will need re-roofing faster than the west sides.
Yeah, it's definitely due to the sun exposure. The east sides, they just don't get as much sun in the wintertime, especially some of the way they're built in with respect to the location of the sun. The further units are angled further away from the sun up at High Point, so they get very little sun in the winter.
Those ones up at High Point too, on the east side, there are a lot more trees that are shading those roofs over there than you've got on the west side.
Yeah, that's true.
So any of the water, the snow that melts in the water, freezes a lot more quickly once it hits the deck areas.
Yeah, it just seems the east side gets it worse. And of course, then the other thing that seems to be falling into place here is just simple age. And the older the roofs, the worse they are.
Yep, definitely.
So is that to say that a phasing approach might treat east and west sides differently and a different time scale? Or would a phasing approach be more about the clusters individually?
Well, let's just say, and this is all this thinking out loud.
Roger.
If we have three clusters, and if we were to break it up to High Point A, High Point B, Pine Cone A, Pine Cone B, Gamble A, Gamble B, it may be, and would have to ask a roofer who is an expert in evaluating this, maybe it would make sense to do High Point A and Pine Cone A before we did High Point B. But again, I don't think we've gone into any and that level of detail in our analysis yet to make that decision. So it's purely hypothetical at this point in time. But it would seem to me to spread it out, do what needs to be done first, spread it out, and maybe even come with a method where the payment of it could be spread out to make it softer for everyone. I think there's a lot of ideas that can be discussed among us here. And my ask is everyone put on their thinking caps because we need input from the owners.
Thanks, Mark.
Anything else in the room? We got nothing here.
Anyone online?
Crickets.
Well, that was a nice short meeting.
Yeah.
All right, anything
Thanks,
else?
everybody.
That's it?
Thank you, Allison.
Thanks, Allison.
You're welcome. Good to see you guys. Let me know if you need anything
Thank-
else.
Go
Thank
take
you,
care of your
Allison.
home, Allison.
All right. Good luck. Take care.
So the bids.
Bye,
that we're
Stacy.
getting,
Bye, Rick.
Bye-bye.
Are they're based on this report?